Today we're going to be talking about some of the revolutions that occurred in Europe in the 1800s. Keep in mind that up until this point we have talked about the French Revolution, and we have talked about the impact of the French Revolution and Napoleon on Latin America. Now we're going to get into the mid-1800s, and yet again we're faced with more revolution. Again, keep in mind the Congress of Vienna that occurred following the rule of Napoleon did a couple different things to try to reestablish order in Europe. Reestablishing the monarchies, legitimacy, putting the true monarchs back in place, and keeping France equal but contained in Europe. So we're going to start talking about how these feelings of nationalism start to pop up in Europe. And in order to do that, we need to look at two different ideas as to how governments should be run in Europe during this time period. We're going to look at a couple different issues. Let's start with who should rule. Liberals and conservatives generally have different ideas as to how things should be run, and that's true even today. Liberals tend to want more change, where conservatives tend to want to keep things the same. Now, when it comes to who should rule, the liberals are saying that it should be the male property owners. They should be the ones who are making up the rules and have a say in the government formation of laws and the implementation of taxes. Conservatives, those are people who want to keep things the same, are saying no, it should be the monarchs and the nobility who are running the government. The goal of government, again, is different for each. The goal of government for the liberals is to protect basic rights. Think Locke. Life, liberty, property. For the conservatives, they're telling people that the goal of government isn't necessarily to protect your rights, but instead to give stability and order to society. The ideas that go along with absolutism, that you accept an absolute ruler or a dictator or an emperor because they give stability and order. Machiavelli, who wrote The Prince, said the same thing. The forms of government, for liberals, they're saying we should have some kind of republic with a constitution, separation of powers. Again, separation of powers. This is Montesquieu's idea. For the form of government for the conservatives, they're saying it should be a monarchy, probably an absolute monarchy. When it comes to the economy, liberals say that the government should have little to no involvement. This is an idea called laissez-faire, and we'll talk more about laissez-faire in the next couple chapters. But this comes out of the ideas of Adam Smith. For conservatives, they're saying that the economy should be controlled by the nobility. They're the ones who are making and producing things. For the liberals, when it comes to religion, it should be freedom of religion. Whatever religion you choose to practice, that's fine. For the conservatives, they say no. It's whatever the established church of the king is. Remember that during 1700s, whatever religion the king was is what everyone was. So they go along with those ideas. You'll notice that when it comes to the ideas of the liberals, that these are all Enlightenment ideas. These are ideas that Locke, Montesquieu, Voltaire had developed in the 1700s. So let's look now at nationalism. Nationalism is a word that you've probably heard time and time again. Nationalism is basically the belief that your loyalty is to a nation of people with a shared culture. So your loyalty isn't necessarily to a king or to an empire, but rather than this collective group of people that share common history, beliefs, language with you. And this applies to what's known as a nation state, a nation with its own independent government. This is Europe in 1850. There are only technically 3 nation states in Europe at this point in time: France, England, and Spain. The rest are either empires or small kingdoms or small empires. There are 5 things that create a nation state. Prior to the French and American Revolution, nationalism wasn't really a consideration when developing a government. You either gave your loyalty to a dynasty like in China, to a fief like in the Middle Ages, to an empire like in Rome, or a city-state like in Greece. But with the rise of the middle class following the age of feudalism, people start to see themselves more as a Frenchman or an Englishman than someone who is working for a lord. All of these things make up a person's culture, a shared way of life, how they dress, what they eat, how they behave. History is their common past. So what events in the past do they share in common? What trials and tribulations have they gone through? Language. Within a nation state, they tend to speak one singular language. There may be different dialects of that language, but it is the same language. A common territory, that is, they live in a common land. Common nationality or ethnic ancestry. And a common religion. This is, again, not necessarily true for every single person, but generally speaking, these are the 5 things that they have in common. So let's take a look first at what's going on in the Balkans. But first, we need to figure out, where are the Balkans? The Balkans are going to be right here. Formerly ancient Greece. Who is controlling the Balkans at this point in time? You might remember it's the Ottomans. So the Balkans is present-day Greece, Albania, Bulgaria, Romania, Turkey, and former Yugoslavia. And at this point in time, it's controlled by the Ottomans. Now remember, the Ottomans, the Ottoman Turks, are Muslim. Go back to the end of 9th grade when we were talking about the rise of the Renaissance, the Crusades. The Europeans are coming into contact with these Ottoman Turks, which is what starts the Renaissance. They control the Bosporus Strait. They control that access to trade. And this is really important. So the Ottomans at this point in time, if you look at the map, you'll see that it covers all of it in tan. The tan is at extent up until 1683, and the darker brown is at 1914. So it is diminishing at this point in time. However, they still control that really important passageway here. They call it Istanbul. It was formerly Constantinople. So in 1821, the Greeks demand independence. They don't agree with a lot of those commonalities that we talked about before. They don't have a common history with the Turks. They don't have common language or a common religion. So they demanded an independence. They wanted their own nation state. They had this nationalistic feeling and wanted their independence. Now, most governments opposed revolution. They didn't want to get involved in yet another revolution. But many of the European nations did see where the Greeks were coming from. The Russians felt connections to the Greeks because they shared a common religion. They were both Orthodox. And here you have Orthodox Christians being ruled by Muslims. Europeans and even Americans love Greek culture. Architecture, government, all of these things are based on Greek history. So they could understand where they were coming from. So the British, the French, and the Russians all come together and actually fight against the Ottomans on the behalf of the Greeks. In 1830, there was a treaty signed by the Ottomans to guarantee that Greece would become its own independent kingdom. That's the first of many revolutions in the 1830s. However, it's really the only successful one. During the 1830s, the Belgians declare independence from the Dutch. In Italy, Nationalists try to unite all of the Italian states on the peninsula, but this is put down by Austria. And in late 1830, the Polish people revolt against Russian rule. Again, all of these people have separate cultures, separate languages, separate history than the people who are controlling them. The big picture, though, these revolutions are basically unsuccessful. Fast forward about 18 years, and you have yet again another set of revolutions, this time in France. So the radicals, that is the people who want massive amount of change, this time demand a democratic government. They want the same basic ideas as what the people were fighting for during the French Revolution. In 1830, Charles tries to return France back to an absolute monarchy. People aren't having it, and riots start. He's forced to flee to Great Britain. In 1848, you have yet again more riots. This time they want the same thing: monarchy to be replaced by a republic. But there's a split in how they want to do this. Some want only political reform. That is, they only want to change the government. Other people want change across the board in the government, in the way society is set up, and in economic reform. Later that year, it's decided that they're going to have a more moderate constitution. Moderate meaning sort of in the middle. Not completely overhaul things, but there are still changes being made. They decide to have a parliament with an elected president. And this time, they get Louis Napoleon. He is the nephew of the original Napoleon Bonaparte. And he follows in the footsteps of his uncle. By 1852, he starts out as an elected president, but takes the title of Emperor Napoleon III. And under Napoleon, the French people actually prosper. Again, same idea as to why the French people accept Napoleon at the French Revolution. They accept this emperor because they're afraid of instability. There's a belief that a strong ruler brings peace. And under Emperor Napoleon III, he builds railroads, he encourages industrialization, public works programs, and unemployment goes down. So despite the fact that they, again, starts out with a desire for a republic, a more democratic kind of government, they end up with an emperor. But he does do good things. On to Russia. Now, Russia, if you remember, at this point in time is still not considered modern, not at least by European standards. They're still under the feudal system. They're lagging behind by about 200 years because they were cut off by the Mongolians. And by many people, at least Europeans and Westerners, they see this feudal system that the Europeans are still under as wrong. That it keeps people down, it keeps people poor, and it stops them from economically advancing. Another issue that Russia has is that they rule over many different cultures. It's a very large empire. They have Poles, Ukrainians, Jews, Romanians, Turks, and a number of other different cultures and ethnic groups that they control. And many of these groups start to feel this sense of nationalism, not to Russia, but to their own separate culture. They want their own separate independent state. This leads to what's known as Russification. Tsars begin to force Russian culture on all of these different ethnic groups within their empire. This leads to many different issues, this time under Tsar Nicholas I. In 1825, there's the Decembrist revolt. They attempted to overthrow Nicholas I and to make Russia a constitutional monarchy. This did not turn out well for the people of Russia. Anybody who tried to overthrow or was part of this revolt was quickly executed or sent to Siberia. And after that, you have extreme oppression by Tsar Nicholas. In 1853, you continue to see this policy of expansion on the parts of the Tsars of Russia. He threatens to take over part of the Ottoman Empire, what's known as the Crimean War. He was looking for the same thing that Peter the Great and Catherine the Great were looking for, and that is warm water ports. So, in 1853, you can see that the Tsar of Russia attempted to take over parts of the Ottoman Empire to get these warm water ports on the Mediterranean and the Black Seas. Needless to say, it did not work out well for him, and they lose in 1856. This is quite a blow for the Russians, because here you have big Russia, who's supposed to be, the biggest empire in all of Russia, is crushed by a dwindling Ottoman Empire. So by the time you get Alexander II, he realizes things need to change, but he doesn't do it in a very bright way. So he realizes if we're going to modernize, we need to get rid of this idea of feudalism, because that's what's keeping us behind. So in 1861, he frees the serfs, but again, not real bright. So he takes all of the land that was formerly as part of these fiefs, owned and controlled by the lords, and he redistributes it among the people of Russia. He gives half of it to the peasants and half of it to the nobles. This is problem number one. There are way more peasants than there are nobility. So right off the bat, this is not equal land distribution. Then he says, okay, so we've given out all of this land, people need to now pay for this land. But he said to the nobles, look, we'll pay for your land. The government will pay for yours. But peasants, you have 49 years or until 1900 to pay for their land. Again, this makes no sense. The nobilities are the ones that have the money. They're the ones who have the capital to be able to pay for this land. But instead, he says that they don't have to pay for it, and forces the people who are broke and trying to start farms and businesses that they have to pay for it. Well, what starts to happen is, once the time of about 1900 starts to creep up on these people, they realize that they're not going to be able to pay for this land. So they sell it. And guess who they sell it to? The nobility. So by the 1900s, we have the same situation. Nobility has bought up all of this land, and the poor are stuck working for the nobility. Again, not bright, and this time he pays for it. He's assassinated in 1881. 1850s in Italy. The people of Italy want unification, this time under Sardinia, which is the largest, most powerful of the Italian states. Count Camillo di Cavour is the prime minister of Sardinia, and he decides he's going to take control of northern Italy. And he's kind of sneaky about it. So he gets the Emperor of France, Napoleon III, to drive Austria out of northern Italy. And he's successful. All of northern Italy, except for Venetia, is now under the control of the Italians. He then moves his focus south to the states in the south, and he provokes a nationalist rebellion in the south. In the south, the nationalist movement is led by Giuseppe Garibaldi, and together they take over basically all of Italy, unifying the entire boot of Italy under King Emmanuel. In 1860, Garibaldi, who led the nationalist movement in the south, allows King Emmanuel in the north to unite the two together. Giuseppe Garibaldi is known for his red shirt. So the red shirts are the leaders and fighters under Garibaldi. By 1866, they finally add Venetia, and in 1870, the Papal States, that is the Pope's states, are all added into one unified Rome. Here's a political cartoon from that time period. From the red shirt, you can tell that this is who. If you say Garibaldi, you are correct. The guy with the crown on his head, you can probably take a guess, is King Emmanuel. And the fact that Garibaldi is helping King Emmanuel put on the boot labeled Italy is supposed to represent this idea that they are together unifying the peninsula. Now we go north to Germany. In 1815, under the Congress of Vienna, the German Confederation is put together. It's a very loose grouping of states. Prussia, who is the most powerful of these states, want unification. They have a mainly German population and the most powerful army in all of Central Europe. Prussia is led by a very strong leader named Otto von Bismarck. He's the Prussian prime minister. And he uses two different ideas to try to unify Germany into one country. This idea of blood and iron. Blood and iron is the basic idea that things are not going to change by people sitting around and talking. It's going to be won through blood and iron. He uses this idea of what's known as realpolitik. There's no room for idealism, no room for this kind of touchy-feely, let's sit around and talk kind of mentality. We need to go out and fight for unification. He said, this is a quote from Bismarck, "It is not by means of speeches and majority resolutions that the great issues of the day will be decided. That was the great mistake of 1848 and 1849, but by blood and iron." This was a speech given to Parliament saying, we need to go out and fight rather than sit around and talk like we did during the revolutions of 1848. So he comes in using these ideas of blood and iron and realpolitik, and he basically rules Prussia without Parliament's consent. And in order to try to unify these into one, in order to unify Germany into one nation state, he goes out and starts some wars. He begins with the 7 Weeks' War in 1866. And Prussia is able to win a victory over Austria. And they are given the areas of Schleswig and Holstein. This allows for the northern Germanic people to be united under Prussia. However, the southern states did not really want to be part of the northern states. This mostly had to do with religion. Going back to the Protestant Revolution, the northern states tended to follow Protestantism, where the southern states, which were closer to Rome, tended to be Catholic. And they didn't want to be controlled by Protestants. But Bismarck felt that even the people who did not want to be controlled by Protestants would unite if they had a common threat, a common enemy. And that leads to the Franco-Prussian War. In 1870, Bismarck does something kind of sneaky. He implies that one of the French ambassadors that had come into Prussia insulted the Prussian king. And over that, on July 19th, France declares war. In September, Prussia takes 83,000 French prisoners, including Emperor Napoleon III. In January of the following year, Prussia then captures Versailles. Remember, the palace that the French king lives in. From that point, King Wilhelm I of Prussia is named Kaiser. Not like the Kaiser role, but instead the emperor of what's known as the Second Reich. The First Reich being the Holy Roman Empire. And for those of you who are history buffs, you know that the Third Reich was led by Hitler. Thank you.